the main motives behind corruption in Ghana, 60% are saying that, well, we Ghanaians, we don't follow rules and regulations, and that's why. And then, of course, that's so we don't follow things formally. We want informal things. We want to go behind the scenes and do things, and that will also, tell you the perception about patronage. That if you want to avoid punishment or sanctions, you want to avoid higher official payments, etc., then of course you want to actually promote patronage. Now, the next one, so what are the motives? So we wanted to find out from respondents. So, Table 2, what are the factors causing corruption in Ghana? This is very important because I'm going to dwell on this matter for some time. What do you think are the factors causing corruption in Ghana? And it's clear. Well, some people talk about low salaries. Some people talk about lack of ethics. Some people talk about get rich. But the key ones are get rich quick. Then the other down, greed and selfishness. So get rich quick, greed and selfishness, and then others will talk about low salaries. I have some comments on this. So if you are taking all this, then you say that the main causes of corruption in Ghana, the first one is get rich quick, which is about 23.9, that's the leading one, is followed by greed and selfishness, and then low salaries. Now, if you look at socio-cultural demands, that is 2.2. So an average, if you are striking an average, the average will be very minimal. It will be, so it's 1.6, 2.2, and 2.5. If you average that, it will be 2.1%. So that's more or less the least score apart from the other. The other means that, well, others may have mentioned, other things which are, insignificant.
All right, and that's our point of interest for our next conversation, 5 minutes after 8, and my guest is Francis Kofi Davor, who is former General Secretary of UNICOF. Good morning to you, welcome.
Good morning.
Okay, so the third point, the third reason why there is corruption and why it is so rife, apparently, is because of low salaries. Do you agree?
Excuse me, not entirely. Not entirely. It contributes amongst the working population. It could be a major factor, but I believe when we are talking about corruption, I think we need to go beyond the working population. But then from within the context of our discussion, I'll limit myself to the working population, because that's really where government loses revenue as a result of corruption. I believe when we are talking about corruption, we are talking about the extent to which government is losing revenue through these kickbacks. So to some extent, yes, I agree. But there are other very key reasons as well why people want to be corrupt.
Okay, but if I'm earning rather very low and I have to survive and expenses are high, then I definitely have to do other things to make that enough money to survive.
So the point we are making is that incomes are so low in Ghana that people can't survive. Because when you talk about the question of survival, it's very critical. Okay, so incomes are low, I agree. As a former General Secretary, I know the levels of income in Ghana. So I would agree with you that relative to even the sub-region, incomes are low. But whether it goes to the extent for us to say that people can't survive, it's something that I will question. But back to the point, people want to make ends meet through corrupt activities, because when you look at the cost of living and then you look at how much people are earning, then you may want to agree that it plays a critical role among the working population. I mean, to borrow your word, in order to make them survive.
But do you disagree that it's one of the root causes of corruption?
I disagree.
Salaries.
I disagree, and my reasons are these, because I think that as a society, as a country, we are losing our values. You know, I know people who are not earning as much, but then they will not engage in corrupt activities. They will not. I mean, no matter what you do, they will not engage in corrupt activities. So it's basically a question of what kind of values do we have? What kind of values do we want to keep? You know, to a certain point, someone may want to sacrifice those values, but in the main, if the person cherishes and values these values, he will not engage in corruption. I mean, some time pass, you pick something on the floor or in public somewhere, and you send it home, you would have to answer why you brought it home in the first place, because it's not yours. You know, so these are the kind of things I'm talking about when I say values. But I agree to some extent that if people would have to make ends meet, if people should be able to rent decent accommodation, you know, our housing sector is in crisis. People cannot just rent houses. Transportation is a problem. You need to own a car to make life convenient for you. And if you have to get all these, and looking at the incomes, you are tempted to get involved in activities that can be described as corrupt activities. To some extent, yes.
But you sure worked in an environment. You saw the extra things that people had to do. Not in the books. You have to hide and do other things just so you can make extra money. What do you think we should be doing in terms of the salary structure? We've also realized that not every some people may have the same qualification, but the pay could be different. Some may be earning a lot higher than the others. What should be the recommendation going forward?
Yes, first of all, I need to go back a little. You know, we came from an economic system where a lot of the things were subsidized. Until recently, we were not paying electricity and water bills. Until in the 60s, we were not paying electricity and water. I came to meet it growing up, you know, and housing was virtually subsidized. Where I lived in Tema most of the time, very much subsidized. You know, so no matter how low, in quotes, your salaries were, you could survive. Now we are running an economy where all these things would have to be paid for, and that's the history of low salaries in Ghana. You know, so what we need to do is to really pay people well. I mean, based on what people are doing, based on performance. Because just like former President KOFI said, if you pretend to pay people, people will pretend to work for you. You know, so we should actually be paying people and holding people accountable.
Are we paying, not to cut you, are we paying based on performance or based on qualification?
Perhaps both. But I think we should be paying based on performance. Because what is qualification if you are not producing results? You must produce results. The organization has an objective to meet on a daily, on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And these things are cascaded into individual objectives which would have to be met. For example, you would have to organize this program and ensure that it's common. So if the indicator is that the performance, the program has taken place, then you have performed. So we should hold people accountable, and people should be rewarded in accordance with performance, not in accordance with qualification. Qualifications will open the door for you, but how you progress, how much you earn, should be based on performance.
How do you critically do this in the public sector?
It can be a little complicated and difficult, but it can be done in the public sector because government, civil service, quasi-government organization they have set objectives they would have to meet. They would have to define these objectives. So just like the private sector would do, define what they want to do and have timelines within which these things would have to be delivered. Identify the resources, human and other resources, and ensure that within a certain timeline these objectives have been met. And it can be done. As a country, we have our objectives. If we don't have, we need to define this. The political authority must define it and ensure that everybody, like the civil service, is aligned to these objectives. Where they come with manifestos, they tell us they will do this, they will do that, they will do this. These, I want to believe, will be the objectives of any government which comes into power. Once you come and you have these objectives, the public service would have to provide that technical support in ensuring that these things are done. And like I said, you need to cascade these things into individual objectives where people know what they have to do, what the deliverables are on a daily, monthly and yearly basis. It can be done.
So, perhaps finally on this conversation, what would you tell, you've been leader of a group of working people before, what would you tell workers whose salaries are not enough, they're tempted to be corrupt in order to survive? How do you tell them not to, even though the temptation is there?
I'll say that you don't have a future with corrupt practices, because you can't be corrupt forever. One day you'll be found out. What my suggestion is for them to insist, knowing how well the company is doing, to make a case for improved salaries. I wouldn't suggest to any worker that engage in corrupt practices, because you can't survive on that for long. Once you leave, if you leave that organization, what you have done to yourself is that you've learned something you may not be able to take into another organization. But that's a habit, and that becomes your character, and you are inclined, or you'll be tempted to involve yourself in that kind of activity, which will lead to your embarrassment and disgrace, and maybe perhaps sack. So my advice for workers is that please perform, prove that you are performing, and insist that the company pays you something that is fair and equitable.
Well, I wish we could have a much longer conversation. There's a union conversation in my head, and you'll be the appropriate person to have that chat with, so we'll arrange that. But thank you so much for passing through this morning on this subject.
Thank you too.
Francis KOFI Davor is former General Secretary of UNICOF. We've got a lot more of these conversations in the future to come right here on the show. Stay with us. It's Roland Walker and his guests on AM Talk. You're watching the AM show. Stay with us.